Okay, tov, everyone. Chodesh tov. There are two basic viewpoints in the ideas of the rabbis as how to study Chumash. One idea, which we attribute to Rashi, but it's much older than Rashi's, is Ein Mukdam U'Meuchar B'Torah. The Torah does not follow any strict chronological pattern. And therefore, there are sections of the Torah which appear before other sections, but in the reality of time, they may have occurred after and not before. The second opinion, a viewpoint of how to look at it, and we attribute it to the Ramban, but again, it is much earlier than the medieval sages, is that the Torah follows a chronological pattern. And that if it's written, this Parsha is written before the other Parsha, you can assume that it occurred in time before the events of the other Parsha. Now, this difference of opinion, which these two opinions are seemingly irreconcilable, take effect in this week's Parsha of Terumah. The Rebbeinu Shalom tells Moshe, Daber b'nei Yisrael, v'yichu Terumah. Meis kol ish asher yidvenu libo tikhu es Terumasi. That you're supposed to collect from the Jewish people Zohar, Kesef, Nechoshes, valuable metals, and V'yosuli Migdash V'shachanti B'sochon. And from these donations, let them construct a Migdash. So a Migdash always presupposes a building of sorts. And I will dwell among them. So when did this happen? When was Moshe instructed to collect the materials to build the Mishkan? So according to Rashi, who is of the opinion Ein Mukdam U'Meuchar B'Torah, the story of the Egel happened before the building of the Mishkan. And therefore, according to that opinion, the building of the Mishkan, so to speak, its purpose was to be an atonement for the sin of the Egel. And it also took into account the fact that the Jewish people were not, so to speak, mature enough to be able to deal kaviyochel with heaven without having some sort of physical representation. So therefore, the Mishkan serves as a transitional point from the Egel Hazov, from the golden calf. Through the Mishkan, you're supposed to get over the golden calf. You're supposed to atone for it. So therefore, the Mishkan had in it elements of physicality. The ark, the menorah, the altar, etc. But it also had elements of a type of spirituality. So, for instance, no one could enter into the Holy of Holies. And that the Shekhinah was present there. However, we'll understand that. So on one hand, it is meant to atone for the sin of the golden calf. And the sin of the golden calf basically is Eil Elohecha Yisrael. They had to have a physical God. They couldn't deal with a God that was invisible to them. So it's meant to atone for that. But on the other hand, it introduces into the Jewish religious life the idea of physicality. There's a place, there are artifacts, there's a ritual. So the Mishkan served that purpose. According to the other opinion, which again, Ramban is a great defender of it, is that the Mishkan preceded the golden calf. The Parshas are as they are written. In Terumah and Tetzaveh appear before Kitisa. And Kitisa is the Parsha of the Egel Hazov. So Terumah and Tetzaveh, so to speak, occurred before. So then what is the purpose of the Mishkan? You cannot say the purpose is kapora, atonement. They have nothing to atone for yet. So the idea that it's always represented is that the building of the Mishkan was a continuation of the revelation at Sinai. The revelation at Sinai was of such a nature that no human beings could withstand it. As I would say, Porcha Nishmosam, they all so to speak, physically died. They had to be revived. So we're looking for a vessel that will represent and continue the idea of the revelation of heaven at Har Sinai and the granting of the Torah. The purpose of the Mishkan was to be that place of revelation, was to be the continuity of Mamad Har Sinai. So that it's not an atonement for anything, but it is rather how to take a purely spiritual experience and somehow represent it in a physical sense that people would be able to relive it and be exalted by it, but yet it would not be of the nature of Har Sinai, that it would be lethal, so to speak. And that was what the Mishkan was supposed to be. It's two different purposes completely, depending on how we look at the order of the parshas of the Torah. Either it's a kapora, or it is Ma'amad Har Sinai. And throughout the ages, the great commentators, the early rabbis, the later rabbis, have attempted somehow to square the circle. Because you have here such a blatant contradiction in how to look at the Torah. And since the Torah includes all contradictions, so there were attempts at reconciliation. One of the attempts that's mentioned by the later rabbis is that this was the difference between the first temple and the second temple. The Talmud teaches us that the second temple was lacking in some of the artifacts that exist in the first temple. So why was it lacking? Didn't have the menorah. So they made a different menorah. We saw they did. Why didn't they make a different Orem? The Ark of the Covenant. And then generally the second temple lacked much of the spiritual nature of the first temple. With no Ruach HaKodesh. The second temple didn't have Nevi'im anymore. It didn't have prophets. In fact, Chazal say that when the second temple was dedicated, Skenim Shavo Sodor, the elders in that generation, meaning those that were alive and yet saw the first temple, wept because they realized that the second temple was, so to speak, inferior. That what they had with the first temple was not restored. So to them, the second temple was more of a zecher, more of a reminder of the Mikdash than the Mikdash itself. So therefore, the later rabbis said that the first temple was a continuation of Ma'amad Har Sinai. The second temple was only an atonement for the sins that destroyed the first temple. So that therefore both theories as to how to look at this really still were in play. And that therefore we want to restore again with the third temple, that will be the continuity of Ma'amad Har Sinai, the continuity of revelation, that it'll be clear to everyone of the exalted state of heaven on earth. It also depends, therefore, how we look at this mitzvah of Terumah. According to those that say that it was a kapora, that it was an atonement, so we understand that the Torah told them gold because they sinned with gold. The Torah told them to take their wealth because it was because of their wealth that they sinned. That's what drove them to it. And that, in effect, is what Aaron said to them at the time of the construction of the golden calf. Bring me your jewelry, bring me your gold. The same gold that you were willing to donate to construct the idol, bring it and we'll use it here for positive purposes. We'll atone for it. In effect, saying that gold is neutral, and it's what you do with it that determines ultimately its value. But if you say, as we said before, the other opinion, that it's not an atonement, but it's a continuity of Ma'amad Har Sinai, then why would the Rabbanu Shalom put such an emphasis on gold and on a building, all the details that we're going to have in the next 5 Parshios? Why all of the concentration on the subject? Whereas Ma'amad Har Sinai, the Torah itself, the Torah described it in relatively few verses. So on that, there were, especially the great Hasidic masters, who saw in the construction of the Mishkan a blueprint as for life itself, for taking the physical things in life, the wealth, the material, the talent, the construction of things, and devoted to a holy purpose. And that's why they say that it says in the Torah, "Ve'osu li migdash." Li, for me. In other words, God says, if you want to find me, then take the physicality of life, which all of us experience, and look behind the veil and construct it in a holy way so that it becomes more than just the physical thing itself. And that's the great challenge in life, always. But people don't see it. So when, for instance, the generations that saw the Beit HaMikdash, what did they see? Did they see a building? Well, it certainly was a building. But is that what they saw? Or did they see that that was a Mikdash? That was a holy place? That, so to speak, the Lord could be found there. And that was the test of every person. And therefore, there was a mitzvah to come 3 times a year to visit the Mikdash, because it was like a checkup. You went to Yerushalayim, you went to the Beit HaMikdash. What were your emotions? What did you see? What did you feel? You know, in a much less fashion, we have the same thing with the Kotel Maravi. Bunch of stones. What does one experience there? What does one feel? What emotions register? So that's a checkup on the person. So some feel nothing. Others feel exalted. So it's the measure of the person. And that was the idea of the Mikdash. The Osuli Mikdash. You want to find me, God says, let's go to the Mikdash. Tell me what you feel like. I always thought that that's what the Gemara means, that in the Beis HaMikdash, Omdim Tzfufim U'Mishtachvim Revachim. It was very crowded. We know it can be very crowded. We ourselves are witness that 50,000 people come to the plaza of the Kotel. So you stand, it's crowded. But when it comes to bow, and they had to bow on their hands and knees, so then there was room for everyone. So Chazal saw in that the idea of humility. The fact that we're escaping our narcissism. Because when we're all crowded together, then I resent the fact that you're here. But if there's room for everybody, and I feel that there is room for everyone, I don't feel constrained upon, because I'm serving the Rabboni Shalom, I'm bowing to my Creator, so then that entire feeling is alleviated. So again, the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash became a test of the people. And both in First Temple times and in Second Temple times, if you read the Nevi'im, so the Navi says, Eize bayis asher tivnu li, Eize mokom menuchasi. Do you think you can build a house for me? It's built for you. Test yourselves. And when they did not do so, when they just saw it. So, for instance, the Gemara says that the end of the Second Temple, which was built by Herod, the most magnificent building in the world. Mishalo roa binyan hurdis, lo roa binyan noem me'olam. Was one of the wonders of the ancient world. People came to see it. But they didn't come to test themselves. They didn't come to attempt to measure their relationship to eternity and to the invisible. They saw it as a building, beautiful building, the nicest building in the world. but all buildings collapse. No building, ruins remain, but the building is gone. Because people saw it only as a building. I think that's what Chazal meant when they said that the third temple will come down, will be built by human beings. That one opinion, there are other opinions, but that one opinion is again, because the task of the temple is not to build a beautiful building. The task of the temple was to give the people a means by which they could measure themselves, by which they would be able to determine if they're on the right road or not. And the tragedy was that the Jewish people failed twice. They were unable to maintain the idea of what the temple was. So then it became only a building. Only a building is always subject to the ravages of time and circumstance, the destruction, the war, the fire. And that is a destructive force. So again, how we view the Mishkan, how we view the Beit HaMikdash itself is a test of ourselves. The question was and is, the Jewish people really feel the absence of the Beit HaMikdash? Are we perfectly satisfied to let it be as it is? We don't have to do anything about it. Because the mere existence of the Beit HaMikdash, of a Mishkan, is itself a great spiritual challenge. Because that in front of your eyes is raised the question of how do you make the physical spiritual? How are you able to rise above the curtains or the bricks or the stones and to see what is involved? And therefore, the Mefarshim say, "V'yichuli li Terumah." Let him take, so v'yichuli li, let him take me, God says. That's the whole purpose of these 5 parshas. To try and make us better people through acts of physicality, material wealth, architectural beauty, all of which. So Shlomo HaMelech will say when he dedicates the Beis HaMikdash, "V'samti shom mokom la'oram." After all of the expense and everything, I made a place for the Torah there too. A little place for the Torah. That is what made it a Beit HaMikdash. Otherwise, it's just a beautiful building, of which there are many in the world. But you have no permanence and will not lead to any exalted understanding of how life should be lived. So thank you for coming and have a wonderful Shabbat and a good Chodesh and stay dry.
While you were away.